It was a bright summer morning in July 2019 when Emily Carter, a 27-year-old adventurous traveler from Oregon, arrived at Yellowstone National Park with two of her closest friends. They had planned the trip for months, eager to explore the breathtaking landscapes, geysers, and endless hiking trails. Emily was known to be fearless, always the one to wander off trails, take photographs in hidden spots, and search for places most tourists never discovered. Her friends often joked that Emily wasn't just a traveler, she was a seeker, always chasing something invisible. On the second day of their trip, the group decided to rest in their rented cabin after a long hike. But Emily, restless as always, told her friends she wanted to go on a quick solo walk. She claimed it would be short, just along a nearby trail that circled back toward the cabin. Her friends didn't worry, it was broad daylight, the trail wasn't far, and she had a good sense of direction. Emily left behind her heavy backpack, her phone charging on the nightstand, and even her water bottle. All she carried was a small camera slung around her neck. When 2 hours passed and Emily hadn't returned, her friends started to grow uneasy. They retraced the path she said she would take, calling her name into the trees, but there was no answer. The forest around them was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made every crunch of leaves underfoot sound unnaturally loud. Panic started to sink in when they realized there were no fresh footprints along the soft dirt trail. Nothing to show that Emily had even walked there. It was as if she had stepped into the woods and simply disappeared into thin air. By late evening, park rangers were called in. A full-scale search was launched within hours, complete with dogs, drones, and volunteers scouring the area. The official report noted that the trail was straightforward, not dangerous, and should have easily brought Emily back to her cabin within 40 minutes at most. But despite hours of searching, no one could find a single trace of her. No discarded belongings, no broken branches, no signs of a struggle. It was baffling. Rangers described it as one of the strangest disappearances they had ever dealt with. What unsettled everyone the most was what Emily had left behind. Her phone still showed the last photos she had taken earlier that morning. Pictures of the sunrise, her coffee mug on the cabin porch, and a group selfie with her friends. The final image on the device was blurry, and appeared to be taken inside the cabin, possibly by accident, showing nothing more than a dark corner of the room. To her friends, it was as if she had walked out the door intending to return in minutes, but never got the chance. The following morning, rangers and volunteers widened the search area, hoping Emily had simply strayed off the main path. The search dogs were released, noses pressed to the ground, weaving between the pines with rangers close behind. For a while, it seemed hopeless. Their signals kept circling near the cabin as if Emily had never gone far. But then, one of the dogs suddenly pulled hard, barking and dragging its handler toward a little-known side trail. The path was overgrown, its wooden sign snapped in half and nearly hidden beneath weeds. Faded red paint spelled the word Yellowstone. Few people even knew it existed. As the search team pushed through the brush, they realized why the trail had been abandoned. The ground was uneven, covered with loose rocks, and the trees loomed so tightly overhead that little sunlight could break through. It was damp, almost unnaturally so, with moss coating the stones and tree trunks like a second skin. The air carried a faint metallic smell, sharp enough to sting the nose. Some rangers exchanged wary glances. They knew this area wasn't safe, and yet the dogs were insistent. Emily's scent was stronger here. What unnerved the team most was the stillness. Yellowstone's backcountry usually echoed with the chatter of birds, the rush of water, or the rustle of animals in the underbrush. But here, there was nothing. Every footstep echoed in the silence, making the forest feel like it was swallowing sound itself. A ranger later reported that the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were being watched. The sensation wasn't fleeting. It lingered with every step, as though eyes were fixed on them from somewhere beyond the trees. After nearly half a mile, the trail narrowed into a steep incline, twisting in unnatural directions. Large branches had been deliberately dragged across the path, forcing the rangers to move them aside one by one. Some described the arrangement as purposeful, almost like barriers meant to discourage, or trap, anyone from continuing further. Yet, the dogs pulled ahead with urgency, ignoring the obstacles, noses pressed to the ground as if following something no one else could sense. At one point, the team found a section of dirt that looked freshly disturbed. Kneeling down, one ranger brushed his hand over the soil and swore it had been dug up and covered again recently. Yet, there were no footprints, no paw marks, no obvious signs of wildlife. Just a patch of earth that didn't belong. The discovery was noted but not explained, adding to the eerie realization that Emily's path had led them into a part of Yellowstone where few dared to go. And she was still nowhere to be found. 2 days into the search, after combing miles of dense forest and ravines, rangers finally stumbled upon something unusual. Lying in the middle of the overgrown trail was one of Emily's hiking shoes. It wasn't ripped, muddy, or tossed aside. It was placed neatly, as though someone had taken the time to set it down deliberately. The shoe looked almost staged, positioned in the very center of the path where it was impossible to miss. What unsettled the rangers most was that there were no tracks leading up to or away from it. The dirt around the shoe was undisturbed, perfectly smooth, as if the forest had swallowed every footprint whole. Nearby, one of the search volunteers spotted something even stranger, a cluster of small rocks arranged in a circle. At first, it seemed like nothing more than kids playing or campers leaving behind a pattern. But the longer they looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't random. The stones had been placed with precision, each one forming a shape that didn't resemble any ordinary campfire ring. The design was unfamiliar, something between a symbol and a warning. A ranger snapped photos and marked the location, but no one could explain why it was there, or how it connected to Emily. The team pressed on, hoping for more tangible evidence. About 20 yards farther, they discovered strands of fabric snagged on a jagged branch. The material was bright blue, the same color as the lightweight jacket Emily had been wearing the morning she vanished. The fabric was torn in 2 small strips, but there was no blood, no signs of a fall, and no struggle marks on the ground. It was as if the jacket had been pulled or cut, then carefully left behind. Rangers began to suspect that someone, or something, was deliberately leaving a trail for them to follow. That night, when the evidence was gathered at the ranger station, the strangeness of the items began to sink in. A single shoe, a mysterious rock circle, and torn fabric didn't fit the profile of an ordinary disappearance. Search dogs were brought back to the site the following day, but oddly, they behaved differently around the rock formation. Normally eager and focused, the dogs became restless, whining, and refusing to step near the circle. Handlers had to tug at their leashes to move them forward, but even then, the animals kept their heads low, tails tucked, as if sensing something invisible in the air. Word of these discoveries began to spread among the search teams, and whispers followed. Some believed Emily had been lured deeper into the forest by someone who knew the land well. Others muttered about older, darker stories tied to Yellowstone's forgotten corners. Tales of rituals, vanished travelers, and symbols carved in stone. Whatever the explanation, one thing was certain: Emily's disappearance was no longer just a missing person case. It was beginning to feel like a puzzle that someone had left behind, piece by piece, waiting for the rangers to solve. By the 4th night of the search, exhaustion had set in, but so had an unshakable unease. Rangers and volunteers had set up temporary camps near the trail where Emily's belongings had been found, hoping proximity might help uncover new clues. As darkness swallowed the forest, the usual sounds of Yellowstone, rustling leaves, distant owls, and the hum of nocturnal life, were oddly absent. Instead, the night was thick with silence, broken only by the crackle of campfires, and the anxious whispers of those trying to convince themselves that nothing was wrong. It was close to midnight when the first strange sound was reported. One ranger, keeping watch at the edge of camp, swore he heard a faint voice echoing through the trees. At first, it sounded like a woman calling for help, the kind of desperate cry that would send anyone running. But when he alerted the others and they paused to listen, the forest was quiet again. Minutes later, another ranger claimed to hear it too, this time softer, more like a whisper than a scream, drifting on the wind. Yet, every time they tried to follow the direction of the sound, it seemed to shift, pulling them deeper into the woods before fading completely. By the next night, the phenomenon grew worse. Several team members described hearing footsteps circling the perimeter of camp. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching in the leaves just beyond the firelight. When they shone their flashlights, the beams cut through nothing but endless trees. Some insisted the footsteps stopped the moment the light touched the ground, as if whoever, or whatever, was moving out there didn't want to be seen. Dogs that had been calm during the day began to whimper and snap at the darkness, their fur bristling as they stared into the tree line. One of the most unsettling reports came from a volunteer who had dozed off in his tent. He claimed he woke to the sound of breathing, not his own, but something heavy and uneven right outside the thin nylon wall of the tent. Frozen with fear, he waited, clutching his flashlight, before daring to shine it outside. No one was there. Yet the ground around his tent showed disturbed dirt, as though someone had been pacing back and forth for hours. The man refused to sleep alone after that night. By the end of the week, almost every searcher had a story. Some heard Emily's name whispered in a voice that didn't sound human. Others described hearing distant crying, echoing through the trees, only to have it abruptly cut off as if someone had muted the forest. These sounds were never captured on equipment, never recorded on radios and never explained. But each night, the whispers, the footsteps, and the cries returned. Always just far enough away to keep them guessing, and always close enough to keep them from feeling safe. On the 7th day of the search, a ranger stumbled upon something that would shift the investigation entirely. Hidden beneath a curtain of thick brush and tangled roots was a narrow opening in the earth, no wider than a doorway. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a shadow between rocks, easily missed if not for the way the dogs suddenly stopped, growling low and refusing to go any farther. Their reaction alone was enough to draw attention, and when the brush was pulled back, the rangers realized they had uncovered the entrance to a cave. The air seeping from the dark hole was unnervingly cold, far chillier than the surrounding forest. It carried a heavy smell, damp stone, burnt wood, and something else no one could place. The team gathered flashlights and cautiously stepped inside. The cave walls were narrow at first, forcing them to move single file, their beams slicing across jagged stone. As they went deeper, the space opened wider, revealing unsettling evidence that this was no untouched cavern. Scattered across the floor were melted candle stubs, dozens of them, arranged in strange clusters as though some kind of ritual had taken place here. Closer inspection revealed scratches etched into the stone walls. Some were crude, long claw-like gouges, while others seemed deliberate, symbols and markings that no one could immediately identify. The deeper they looked, the more patterns appeared, overlapping one another as if carved over time by different hands. Rangers described the sight as chaotic, but oddly purposeful, as though whoever had been inside had wanted to leave a message. One ranger whispered that the symbols reminded him of old folklore, though he couldn't name which. The silence of the cave made every word echo unnaturally, forcing them all to lower their voices. It was there, against one of the rocks, that they found something chilling, a torn piece of fabric unmistakably blue. It matched the strips earlier discovered snagged on branches along the trail. This piece was larger, dirt-stained, and caught beneath a sharp stone, as though it had been forced into place. Next to it lay a half-burnt matchstick and a patch of blackened earth, where something had been set on fire. Was it a campfire? Or something else? None of the rangers wanted to say it aloud, but the thought was already hanging heavy in the air. As they explored further, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than before. Some swore they heard the faint drip of water echoing through the tunnel, but others insisted it was something different, like hushed voices murmuring just beyond the beam of their flashlights. The cave went deeper still, curving into darkness, but the team hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to see what lay beyond that bend. They marked the site, noted the findings, and prepared to return later with more equipment. But the truth was clear to every man and woman there: this cave was not a place stumbled upon by accident. Someone, or something, had been using it. When rangers returned to Emily's cabin to re-examine her belongings, they found something they had overlooked in the early chaos of the investigation. A small leather-bound journal tucked beneath her pillow. It wasn't large, just a pocket-sized notebook she often carried on her travels. Her friends confirmed it was Emily's. She had a habit of documenting her thoughts, sketches, and even fragments of poetry whenever she visited new places. At first glance, the journal seemed normal, filled with cheerful notes about the geysers, the scenery, and the excitement of finally seeing Yellowstone. But as the pages neared the days before her disappearance, the tone shifted drastically. In entries dated only 2 days before she vanished, Emily wrote about a strange feeling of being watched. She described waking in the middle of the night inside the cabin, convinced that someone was standing outside the window. Her friends had dismissed it as nerves or an overactive imagination, but Emily's handwriting revealed how deeply unsettled she was. "It doesn't feel like an animal," she wrote. "It feels human. But not. Something knows I'm here." The words were underlined twice, the ink pressed hard enough to indent the page beneath. The following entries grew even more disturbing. Emily wrote of hearing whispers at night, faint and indecipherable, drifting in from the woods. She claimed the whispers sometimes spoke her name. One line read, "They want me to come closer. I dream of trees that close in like walls. I wake up with dirt under my nails, but I haven't left my bed." The handwriting here was shaky, uneven, unlike her usual neat script, almost as though her hand trembled while writing. Then came the final entry, dated the very morning she disappeared. The page began normally, describing breakfast with her friends and the beauty of the sunrise. But halfway down, the words became frantic. She wrote, "The cave is real. I keep seeing it in my dreams. They're calling me there. I think I have to follow." The last sentence was smudged, as if her pen had dragged across the page in a hurry. "If something happens, don't let them find me. After that, the journal ended abruptly. Rangers and investigators were unsettled by the discovery. Some believed Emily's writings proved she had been hallucinating or experiencing paranoia, possibly caused by isolation or stress. Others weren't so sure. The detail, the consistency, and the connection to the cave they had just uncovered were too eerie to ignore. The journal didn't just document fear. It almost felt like a warning, one that Emily herself hadn't fully understood. Whatever the truth was, her final words suggested she knew she was walking toward something, and that she might never come back. Despite weeks of exhaustive searching, Emily Carter was never found. Hundreds of volunteers, rangers, and even federal authorities scoured Yellowstone's vast backcountry, but every trail led to silence. The cave was sealed off after investigators declared it unsafe for further entry, yet many in the search party admitted they were relieved. Few wanted to step inside again. For Emily's friends and family, the unanswered questions became unbearable. How could someone vanish so completely in broad daylight, only a mile from a cabin full of people? Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some whispered that Emily had fallen victim to a hidden community of people living off-grid in Yellowstone's remotest corners. Others believed she had stumbled onto something she was never meant to see. Something connected to the strange cave, the symbols, and the staged clues along the abandoned trail. Officials dismissed these claims publicly, calling it an unfortunate accident or a case of getting lost. But those who had been on the search teams privately admitted they had never experienced anything like it before. Even after the official search ended, hikers continued to report unsettling encounters near the same closed trail. Several claimed to hear footsteps behind them, only to turn and find no one there. Others described the sound of a woman crying faintly in the distance, though no person ever appeared. One man swore he saw a figure in torn blue clothing standing between the trees at dusk, but when he approached, the figure melted into the shadows. Each report only deepened the sense that Emily's disappearance was not an isolated tragedy, but part of something larger hidden within Yellowstone's depths. Local folklore quickly absorbed the story. Residents living near the park began to revive old tales of spirits and rituals tied to the land long before it became a national treasure. Some pointed to the symbols found inside the cave, claiming they resembled markings used in forgotten ceremonies. Others connected the whispers at night to legends of voices that lured travelers into the woods, never to return. Whether superstition or truth, the details of Emily's case seemed to breathe new life into those dark stories, making Yellowstone feel less like a sanctuary of nature and more like a place of secrets. Years later, Emily's case remains unsolved, her journal and the strange evidence locked away in official files. Her friends refuse to speak publicly, and her family still leaves flowers at the park entrance each summer. But rangers who patrol that area after dark admit they avoid the closed trail whenever possible. Some say the silence there feels too heavy, too expectant, as if the forest itself remembers what happened. And though no one dares say it outright, many believe that Emily Carter never truly left Yellowstone at all. So what really happened to Emily Carter in Yellowstone? Was she lured by something human, or by something far older that has always lived in those woods? The cave remains sealed, the trail remains closed, and the questions remain unanswered. But one thing is certain: Emily walked into Yellowstone in 2019, and she never walked out again. And if you ever find yourself hiking in the park at night, when the forest grows silent and the air grows colder, listen carefully. Because some say her whispers are still out there, calling someone else to follow.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.